On the morning of September 3rd, 2025, Vernon Patton was doing exactly what a 72-year-old retired man in the Ozarks does on a normal day. He was on a small tractor, laying gravel for a mountain biking trail on property near Mulberry Mountain in Franklin County, Arkansas, not far from the tiny community of Cass. He had taken photos of the animal before it attacked. His son arrived to check on him, found the bear still there, and managed to pull it off. Patton was airlifted to a hospital in Little Rock. He died 11 days later. It was the first fatal bear attack recorded in Arkansas since 1892. 133 years without a single. Then a morning on a tractor in the Ozarks Hills changed. Less than a month later, on October 2nd, a 60-year-old man named Max Thomas from Springfield, Missouri, was camping at Sam's Throne Recreation Area in Newton County, Arkansas. He had taken photos of a bear near his campsite and sent them to family members. He was camping on a cot without a tent. When welfare check calls to his family went unanswered, the Newton County Sheriff's Office sent a deputy. The deputy found a campsite that had been disturbed, evidence of a struggle, and Thomas's body approximately 180 feet into the woods, dragged there by the bear. The Arkansas Game and Fish Commission shot a bear believed to be responsible. DNA testing later confirmed they had shot the wrong bear. The animal that killed Max Thomas of Springfield, Missouri, was, as of the last public statement from the commission, still at large somewhere in the Ozarks. 2 people dead within 30 days. The bear responsible for at least one of those deaths still unaccounted for. And a population of black bears in the Missouri and Arkansas Ozarks that is growing at 9% per year, with a trajectory that doubles the population by the mid-2030s. This is the Ozarks story that most Missourians have not fully processed yet. Subscribe right now. Hit the button and the bell. To understand how Missouri went from virtually no bears to nearly 1,000 in 70 years, you have to go back to what happened in Arkansas in 1958. By the mid-20th century, unregulated hunting had essentially erased the black bear from Missouri and Arkansas. Missouri's population was presumed gone entirely by the mid-1900s. Arkansas, which had been known historically as the bear state for the density of its bear population, had fewer than 50 bears left by the time the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission began its restoration program. Between 1958 and the mid-1960s, the commission trapped more than 250 black bears in Minnesota and Manitoba, Canada, and relocated them to the Ozark and Ouachita Mountains of Arkansas. Nobody hauled bears into Missouri. The Missouri population rebuilt itself naturally, one animal at a time, as bears from Arkansas pushed northward through the forests of the southern Ozarks. The strategy worked extraordinarily well. Arkansas now has an estimated 5,000 to 6,000 black bears. Missouri's population, which had 0 confirmed individuals in the 1950s, now stands at approximately 800 to 1,000 animals and is growing at roughly 9% per year. Missouri has held 4 annual black bear hunting seasons since 2021, with 400 permits issued each year and more than 5,969 hunters applying in 2024 alone for those 400 slots. In 2024, Missouri hunters harvested 15 bears. The population continued growing. The bears are expanding into areas they have not occupied in more than a century. The Missouri Department of Conservation has documented bear activity near the Lake of the Ozarks, south and west of St. Louis, and near Poplar Bluff, communities and suburbs where residents have spent their entire lives without considering that bears are part of the local wildlife profile. Trail cameras set up by hunters and landowners across the Ozarks are recording bears in places and at frequencies that would have been remarkable 20 years ago and are now becoming routine. Hit the like button. It tells the algorithm this story matters. The question the 2 fatal Arkansas attacks in fall 2025 forced into the open is the one wildlife managers and Ozarks communities are now working through without a clear precedent to guide them. Black bear attacks are rare. That is a documented fact and not reassuring framing. Arkansas had not recorded a fatal bear attack in 133 years before September 2025. Missouri has not recorded one in the modern era. The statistical rarity is genuine, but 2 fatal attacks within 30 days in the same Ozarks region, involving 2 bears that wildlife officials describe as having behaved in ways that are unusual even by the standards of occasional bear encounters, suggests that something is happening that requires more than a reminder that attacks are statistically uncommon. The bear that killed Vernon Patton at Mulberry Mountain was a yearling male, a young animal, that was malnourished despite having a stomach full of berries, leaves, and nuts. Arkansas Game and Fish Commission tests found microscopic abnormalities in the bear's central nervous system. What caused those abnormalities is not publicly confirmed. The bear that killed Max Thomas was estimated at 150 to 170 pounds, based on photos Thomas sent to his family before the attack. It was not large. It attacked a sleeping man in his campsite and dragged the body 180 feet into the woods. Researchers who study bear migration and population dynamics point to a possible contributing factor. Emily Puckett, an associate professor at the University of Memphis who previously worked on the Missouri Black Bear Project tracking bears coming into Missouri from Arkansas, noted that a bad season for mast crops, the nuts, acorns, and berries that bears depend on to fatten up before winter hibernation, can drive unusual bear behavior. The fall of 2025 coincided with drought conditions across the Ozarks region and La Niña weather patterns that reduce precipitation across the southern United States. An Ozarks drought during the critical fall fattening period, when bears need to consume enormous quantities to survive hibernation, creates conditions where bears that would normally avoid human contact have reason to override that avoidance. This does not explain everything. The Patton bear had a full stomach. The neurological abnormalities found in that animal are a separate factor without a confirmed cause. The Thomas bear's motivation is unknown because the animal was never conclusively identified. What the research context does is establish that the 2 attacks did not occur in a vacuum and that the combination of a rapidly growing bear population, a drought-stressed mast year, and expanding bear territory into areas with increasing human presence created conditions for the kind of encounters that remained hypothetical in Missouri for most of a century. There is another dimension to the bear story that the wildlife management conversation tends to underemphasize. The same forces that have transformed the Ozarks land ownership picture, the corporate buyers, the private hunting preserves, the locked-off acreage, are also reshaping how bears and humans interact in the landscape. Large private hunting preserves in the Ozarks actively manage elk and other game animals for trophy hunting clients. Some have introduced non-native ungulates. The land management practices that maximize trophy game production are not necessarily the same practices that minimize human-bear conflict. Baiting stations, food plots, and concentrations of accessible protein sources can attract bears in ways that alter their habituation patterns and their comfort level around human infrastructure. Private landowners who have enclosed thousands of Ozarks acres are managing those acres for their own purposes, without coordination with the MDC's bear management programs, and without any obligation to share data about what their trail cameras are recording. The bears that are expanding into new territory around the Lake of the Ozarks and toward the St. Louis suburbs are not moving through wilderness. They are moving through a patchwork of private land, conservation areas, suburban developments, and resort communities. The bear that appears on a trail camera in a gated lakeside community near Osage Beach is navigating the same land ownership complexity that this channel has been documenting for months. The bears do not have access to the plat maps. They go where the food is and where the cover allows, where the private land has been fenced and the habitat corridors have been fragmented by development. The interactions between bears and the humans who did not expect bears tend to get closer and less predictable. For Ozarkers who spend time in the woods, the hunters, the hikers, the float trip campers, the landowners checking fence lines at dawn, the transition from a region with essentially no bears to a region with nearly 1,000 bears growing at 9% per year is a practical reality that their habits and awareness may not have caught up to. The Missouri Department of Conservation's Bear Awareness Guidance exists. Bearwise.org has instructions. The campground at Sam's Throne, where Max Thomas died, had no bear-specific warning posted at the time of the attack, according to reporting on the incident. The bear that killed Max Thomas of Springfield, Missouri, was still unaccounted for after the wrong animal was shot in the aftermath of the attack. The Game and Fish Commission had traps and cameras in the area. Only one bear had been observed on the cameras, and none had been caught. The commission continued to urge all visitors to the Ozark National Forest to remain bear-aware, to store food in bear-resistant containers, to never leave food unattended, and to immediately report any aggressive or unafraid bear behavior. What the MDC's Bear Awareness Campaign does not fully address, because it cannot, because it is an awareness campaign and not a land use policy, is the structural question of what happens when a wildlife population that spent a century being absent rebuilds itself into a landscape that has been fundamentally reshaped during that century. The Ozarks that bears disappeared from in the early 1900s was not the Ozarks they are returning to. The forest cover has changed. The human footprint has changed. The land ownership has changed. The recreational use has changed. Max Thomas was camping at a primitive campground in the Ozark National Forest. Sam's Throne is a well-known recreation area for hikers and campers. He took photos of the bear at his campsite and sent them to family. The kind of thing a reasonable person does when they see a bear, treating it as a wildlife encounter rather than a threat assessment. Between 1892 and 2025, that approach had never resulted in a fatality in Arkansas. The statistical rarity is real. The assumption that the statistical rarity would hold indefinitely in a region where the bear population is tripling and expanding into new areas may need to be re-examined. Missouri's black bears are not going away. The population that was presumed extinct in this state in the 1950s has rebuilt itself to nearly 1,000 animals and is on a trajectory to double in a decade. The bears are moving into new territory. They are appearing near communities that have not had bears in living memory. The 2 deaths in the Arkansas Ozarks in fall 2025 were the first in the region in 133 years. The conditions that contributed to those attacks, drought, mast failure, population expansion, increasing human-bear overlap, are not one-time events. The Ozarks is changing in ways that the people who live in it are still accounting for. The bears are part of that change. They were here before. They left. They came back. And the region's relationship with them is being renegotiated right now, in real time, without a clear historical template for how it goes. Subscribe if you haven't. Hit the bell. Drop a comment. Have you seen a bear in Missouri or the Ozarks? Because the MDC tracks every reported sighting, and the map of where bears are appearing is expanding in ways that most Ozarkers have not seen. Thank you for watching. The truth doesn't shout. It waits for you to look closer.